Hello, everyone, and welcome to John Redmann, Power of Attorney, the show that aims to empower you through knowledge of the law. I'm Attorney John Redmann.
And hello, everyone. I'm Shauna Sanford. Welcome to the show. Our focus today is on the groundbreaking lawsuit charging the oil and gas industry with destroying much of Louisiana's coast. It is the latest in a dispute that's been going on for decades. Just who is responsible for damaging the coast? Some say the blame falls squarely with the oil industry. Others blame the very restoration efforts taking place. Well, our guests today are going after the oil companies for their part in the destruction of Louisiana's wetlands, and now they claim the governor is going after them.
Joining us are the Vice President of the Southeast Louisiana Flood Protection Authority East, renowned author of Rising Tide, John Barry, and the prosecuting attorney for the coastal erosion lawsuit, Gladstone Jones. They say these 97 oil companies need to pay for the damage they've done, and they need to repair that coastline they've destroyed.
Well, John, we will talk to our guests in just a few moments, but there are some critics out there who simply don't like the fact that there are attorneys who are going to collect large amounts of money from this lawsuit. What do you say to people out there who have an issue with that?
Well, it's a fair concern. A lot of people say that lawyers that make a lot of money after a lawsuit has been fought for years and won, these lawyers that make a big fee on the case, well, that's just not fair. And there's a lot of criticisms of these lawyers. Well, take it with a grain of salt. I am a personal injury lawyer. I get paid a fee on cases at the end of the day. The tobacco industry lawsuits, the asbestos litigation lawsuits, these are cases that are very expensive. They take years to prosecute. Nobody else is willing to step forward. Nobody's willing to do it for free, and the state and nobody else is willing to pay typically hundreds of thousands, if not millions and millions of dollars, plus front all the costs and gamble and possibly lose. Even the governor of Louisiana is saying he doesn't even want to take that chance and he doesn't want to file that lawsuit. So it's very convenient to say lawyers shouldn't get paid their fees at the end of the day, but my respectful reply is the only way you get excellent representation is in the marketplace, where you get lawyers who say, you know what, I'll take that chance and I will gamble. And if those cases are lost, the litigants, the people who have claims such as this, they don't take a financial risk. And if they win, well, then it's only fair that the lawyers should be reimbursed their expenses and should get a portion of the fees, which the courts will approve if they're fair and reasonable. If they're not fair and reasonable, the courts can cut those fees.
Okay, all right, well, we will hear what our guests have to say about that as well. Coming up, John Barry and Gladstone Jones will join Power of Attorney when we come back. Stay with us.
We can beat this. The spill in the Gulf, it's a catastrophe.
But we will solve it.
This is not a Gulf Coast issue.
This is a national problem that requires a national solution.
Well, what can you do to help?
What do you have to offer? Your voice.
Speak up.
Add your name to the petition
Demanding restoration and protection
Of America's Gulf Coast.
Sign it.
Share it.
Be the one.
Be the one. RestoreTheGulf.com.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Well, today we're talking about the huge coastal erosion lawsuit that has really added fuel to the fierce debate over exactly who should be held responsible for damaging the coastal wetlands. Governor Bobby Jindal has been very vocal in his very strong opposition to the suit filed by the Southeast Louisiana Flood Protection Authority East. But our guests say that at this point, the court is the only place where any real solution to the serious problems facing the coast and residents can be found.
Our first guest today is the man who has really been the face of the lawsuit. He's the board vice president, John Barry. Joining Mr. Barry is attorney Gladstone Jones, lead counsel for the lawsuit. Gentlemen, thank you both for being with us. And you know what? It's a pretty complicated lawsuit on one hand. On the other hand, it's really not. You're saying you oil companies did damage by agreement, by law. You're supposed to fix the damage you caused. You haven't fixed it. Now it's time to pay the tab.
Yeah.
But I want you, Mr. Barry, why don't you start by telling us what the lawsuit's about?
Obviously, our responsibility is to protect the lives and property people within our jurisdiction, Metro New Orleans on the east bank of the river. And this is, frankly, an enormous burden. As we go into the out years, the threat increases, the expenses increase, and part of the reason is because of the destruction of the buffer lands. Outside the levee, we have these wetlands that have slowed down hurricane storm surge, decreased hurricane storm surge, and the destruction of those lands increases the storm surge against our levees, makes it much more difficult and expensive for us to protect people inside the levees. So part of the responsibility, not all of it, but part of the responsibility for the destruction of those lands is the operations of the oil and gas industry. Even the industry admits that they are responsible for part of this land loss, and we felt it was time that they stepped up and paid their share of the damages so that we can take the money and upgrade the flood protection system.
Before we go on, I want to let our viewers know that we invited Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority Chairman Garrett Graves from the governor's office to be a part of this show, and he declined that invitation. We also invited Keith Jarrett, who is the defense counsel for Exxon, and we did not receive any sort of response. So we just want to make it very clear that we did invite the other side to be a part of this discussion. We actually have some pictures of the coast to illustrate the damage done, and while we bring those up so our viewers can see, Glad, why don't you sort of expound on what John just said about the amount of the damage that has been done?
Well, the damage has been tremendous, but I think John started the discussion at the right spot, which is the mission of the authority that he has served on is to protect the greater New Orleans area from flooding and what all that brings, the loss of lives, the loss of property. And that's really where this lawsuit starts. It then kind of jumps over to, we have some photographs here. We brought we have hundreds and hundreds of photographs like this, but if you take a look at these pictures, you can see right on the right side of the screen various canals, and then kind of going up the picture, there are canals that have not been maintained. And the net result of those canals not being maintained is that salt water is able to run up from the Gulf of Mexico and then make its way into the otherwise healthy marshes, destroying those marshes and taking away that first level of defense, the Louisiana coastline, to flood protection in the greater New Orleans area. And I want to make this point that this particular lawsuit is critically important for greater New Orleans. The estimates for damages, if something is not done to protect the city from hurricanes and flooding, are in the billions of dollars a year in terms of damage that will be caused here. So we view this as a critically important lawsuit for greater New Orleans. We are honored that we were asked to take on this charge. Despite the criticism, we anticipate prevailing because simply we're right. We're right about the levee authority was right to bring the case. The legal team that we've put together is convinced that the massive damage was caused. We have the help of the oil and gas industry, who has conceded or admitted that they have caused extensive damage out there in this particular area. And while we have certainly heard criticism about the lawsuit, we look forward to letting the evidence be presented to a court where we are confident that we'll prevail.
And you said that this is going to go to a jury, right? This is going to be a jury trial?
We think so, yeah. And let me say that even Gary Graves, who violently opposes the lawsuit, has said on the record he's the first person to admit that there is liability there for the oil industry. So the question is, why do they oppose the lawsuit? It's a really kind of ridiculous position for them to be in, I think.
Well, let me kind of follow up. And we had the picture on the screen a minute ago that you mentioned these canals, and just to make sure the viewers are kind of on the same page. And I've had the opportunity to look at this a little bit, and I know Sean and I, we've researched it, and we have people who help us research and prepare for the show. These canals, I've heard there's as high as 10,000 miles of canals that were dredged by the oil and gas companies over the decades for purposes of drilling for oil and gas and then transporting them on barges. That is what they dug out of the earth. And what they were supposed to do was, when they were finished drilling over the decades, leave the marshland in a condition such that salt water could not enter the area and kill the plants, because that's brackish water. It's either fresh water or fresh water with a little salt in it, but not
Right.
pure salt water from the Gulf, correct?
That's right, and that is kind of the underpinning factual basis of the lawsuit. It's really not that complicated. These oil and gas companies, for over the last 85 to 90 years, have operated in this particular area. Over the years, the Army Corps of Engineers required these oil companies to operate pursuant to permits, which had certain requirements about their obligations when they finished using these particular canals. And I see we've taken our picture down, but the long and the short of it is that this area was in existence for about 6,000 years as an intact marsh. It stayed that way for 6,000 years. And over the course of the last 85 years, we have managed, through the use of these 10,000 miles of canals, to date, to lose 1,900 miles, an area the size of the state of Delaware, as John often points out. And the consequences going forward, 30 more years or 60 more years, are that many of our coastal communities are going to be lost. They're simply going to be lost. Grand
And
Isle
we
will be.
actually have a map
Yeah.
to show this that we're going to bring up so folks can actually
Yeah.
see
Let's
what you're
bring that up.
talking about.
Right. So this is a map. This is a map that was.
Let's leave that map up for a few minutes, because what's in this map? Describe
this
this map
is-
you provided to us.
Yeah. You want to go?
It's just pretty much the projected land loss. That all that red area is going to disappear.
So everywhere there's red, there's currently land there today, but by the year 2050, there's going to be water there.
Yeah, and pretty simply, and that's if nothing is done.
That's if nothing is done.
Nothing is done. So that is a massive area of land in Louisiana, and what has escaped people, or what I want people to make sure that they understand, is that there are an awful lot of coastal communities inside of that red zone. I think we have another map.
Yeah, let's go to 2100 so that we can see some of those communities that you're talking about that you have said will be gone.
Yeah. This is a map of projections for the year 2100. And again, were all prepared outside of the context of this litigation. These are scientific reports that were prepared in connection with putting together the master plan and scientists looking at the problem here. Well, if you take the 2050 map and you take the 2100 map, what becomes very clear is that many of these, you can see pretty clearly, Grand Isle it is literally sitting in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico.
It's
And
no
many-
longer an island, it's now water.
Dulac and Port Fourchon and all of these communities, which have a tremendous amount to our culture in Louisiana, have families and communities and churches and businesses and property. That's no longer going to exist if there is not a proper funding mechanism whereby the people who are responsible for causing the damage pay to repair it. And
Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
no.
Finish.
That really is the essence. No doubt about it, the marsh existed and the coastline existed for 6,000 years. No doubt about it, over the last 85 years, oil and gas contributed to the loss. No question about it, the Army Corps of Engineers and their levying had a role in this loss. But at the end of the day, unless funding is provided to implement this master plan, which we applaud, and John has applauded on a routine basis, the projections of that are $50 to $100 billion. Unless money is obtained to do that, to implement that plan, these towns sitting in this map in 2100 and all of the families that go with it are going to be in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico.
All right, we're starting to run short on time for this segment, but I want you to tell us more about that master plan. But this map, which shows a lot of land is gone, how much is that just some scientists convenient?
No, that's a consensus view of some of the best.
In other words,
coastal
that's not really
scientists and-
debated.
No.
That this land is
And,
disappearing. And this master plan, is this
Well,
a
the
master plan of
state-
a bunch of trial lawyers?
No,
Tell
no.
me about the master plan.
The state has a Coastal Protection Restoration Authority, which I sit on, run by Garrett Graves. It
Gary
prepares
Graves,
them.
defense attorney.
No, Garrett
sorry.
Graves, who's one of the opponents of the lawsuit.
Oh, right. I'm sorry, of course.
And works for the
Who
government.
we invited to come on the show.
Yes,
Right.
right.
And they produced a plan in 2012. We updated annually. The 2012 plan passed unanimously in the state legislature. It was hailed by scientists around the world. one of the few areas where the scientific community, environmentalist groups actually agreed with the governor. We all think it's an excellent plan. It's realistic, it's doable, but it has no money. Well, it hopes to prevent those maps from coming true. It hopes, we can't really restore the land that's lost, but what we hope to do is retard the continued land loss and build land in front of populated areas so that they will provide a buffer against hurricanes.
I'm going to have to ask you to hold that thought. We have to take a quick break. We still have lots of questions. Our viewers have lots of questions. So when we come back, we will give those questions to our guests. So stay with us. We'll be right back after this break.
We never forget our best teachers, the ones who do so much more than teach. They inspire and insist we bring our best in everything we do. We find those mentors in our Catholic schools. It's why Catholic school graduates consistently go on to college, land better jobs, embrace faith, and lead. Louisiana Catholic schools, in a class of their own.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Our guests today are John Berry. He is the Vice President for the Southeast Louisiana Flood Protection Authority East and lead counsel for the coastal erosion lawsuit Gladstone Jones. Now, we know that you have lots of questions, and we're going to get to your questions in just a few moments. Of course, we're talking about this huge coastal erosion lawsuit, and we have to make very clear that there could be some changes to the board that you sit on. So at the time of this taping, you are the Vice President, but maybe by the time it airs, things could be a little bit different for you.
Because of the governor's opposition to the lawsuit.
Now, you were talking a moment ago about that master plan. The governor has said that by filing this lawsuit that you have filed, you really have usurped his authority, and that, in fact, it does harm to that $50 billion master plan.
Well, the reality is our board, which is a board of scientists and non-political flood experts, felt that we had a fiduciary responsibility to file the lawsuit because the master plan is a great plan, but there is no funding for the master plan. Clearly, we have the authority to file the lawsuit. We have many times invited those who say we don't have authority to try to convince a judge that we don't, and they have yet to file. We need to build these projects to protect people's lives, and there is no money to fund the master plan. I would like to know where they plan to get the money from. Garrett Graves says you need to strategize, prioritize, and sequence. But we spoke with Garrett about this beginning last December. He came to our executive session twice, and since then, and we gave him every opportunity to explain what the state's plan was to come up with funding for the master plan, and also to explain to us why we shouldn't go forward with our suit. And after all this conversation, twice we unanimously voted to continue the lawsuit. In the first place, to go forward with it, and the second, to continue, because his arguments, frankly, didn't make any sense to us.
Okay, all right. Well,
you know, I honestly think this is a political issue, purely politics. They used to say that the flag of Texaco flies over the Louisiana Capitol, and the industry has tremendous political clout. There's no question about it, and honestly, I just don't see a reason to oppose this other than politics.
We have lots of questions from our viewers, and the first question comes from John, and he says, have there been any other successful lawsuits like this one in the past? And in doing some research, it's actually been likened to the tobacco lawsuit. In the sense that
the idea for this did come from the board. We've been accused of having been hijacked by trial lawyers, which is totally untrue. We spent a lot of time as a board thinking about this before I ever approached an attorney. And the idea of the tobacco lawsuit was sort of in our minds. The idea that the state was responsible for the health care of people who had smoked and therefore should be compensated by the industry. Similarly, we are responsible for people's lives and property with the flood protection system, and the increase to those costs are something that we need compensate. We feel we should get the money necessary to protect people's lives from the industry, which has increased the risk to those people's lives.
Yeah, and that was something that we wanted to touch on, why exactly this board is filing this lawsuit, because some folks have said you're a regional board. I mean, really, how much authority do you have?
We're only filing for our jurisdiction. The problem is statewide.
Yeah, there's two things here. There's no question that this authority that John serves on is only seeking damages from those oil companies that operated within their jurisdiction. We have certain legal requirements that we have to prove. I have to prove that one of the 97 oil companies, in fact, impeded their ability to discharge their fiduciary responsibility to protect Greater New Orleans from flooding and the loss of lives and property. So this is not, I'm not, and they're not, the levy authority is not seeking to fix problems over in south of Lafayette. We are focused on the greater New Orleans. However, it is a statewide problem. Mm-hmm. Those towns in South Louisiana all the way across our coast that have been impacted all suffer from the same thing. They're going to sink. They're going to disappear unless somebody does something to get a funding mechanism. We are focused on Greater New Orleans. We will continue to be focused on Greater New Orleans. But I think the larger question is what has driven the opposition from our leadership at the governor's office. It is incredible that in filing this lawsuit and this authority discharging its responsibility to the people of the greater New Orleans area, that this governor and Garrett Graves and the czar of the master program or plan has not articulated one good reason why this law should not go forward, has not said to the people of South Louisiana, your land is going to disappear unless we get a funding mechanism. It would seem to us, and it would particularly seem to me, that if you're going to oppose a lawsuit like this, you're going to tell the people and be honest with the people that the damage caused without this coastline, we're at great risk. And more likely than not, if you take a look at our maps again, 2100, these little towns, an explanation ought to be provided to all of those people why their towns are going to disappear and the culture is going to go with it.
We have another question here from Edward, who says, what is the difference in having the suit filed in federal court versus state court?
Well, this is a common problem we see in lawsuits, or a common issue that we see in lawsuits, whether the case is going to be prosecuted in state court versus federal court. Because some of the 97 oil companies are from Louisiana, there's no federal jurisdiction over this case. We don't have federal causes of action, et cetera. So the lawsuit was initially filed in state court. Mm-hmm. The defendants, which they have the right to do, elected to try and remove it and make certain arguments that in fact there is federal jurisdiction. The plan is to proceed in state court. We filed a motion to remand that lawsuit from federal court back to state court where we think it belongs.
Right.
And what that means is that we will be in Orleans Parish sometime in the future, raising these issues, raising three simple issues as to whether the oil companies caused damage, whether those damages impacted the levy authority, and what are those damages. We think that'll happen in the future in Orleans Parish.
Is that October 2nd? Is that when you're supposed to find out?
No, there was originally a hearing set for October 2nd, but that's been pushed back to allow the parties to do their briefing.
Okay, all right. And we have another question from Nolan, who says, are individuals or businesses going to have to file claims like with the BP settlement from the oil spill?
This is not a class action. We are a public body. We're the sole entity involved with this lawsuit. Any money that we win in this lawsuit will go to protect people's lives and property, to improve the flood protection system.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I thought you wanted to add something.
No, I don't have anything to add. That's exactly right.
Well, let's talk a little bit too about what could potentially happen to this lawsuit if, in fact, you are no longer a member of the board. I mean, the governor has made it very clear that he does not want you to be on
our
the
board was created after Katrina. There was a statewide constitutional amendment, 81% of the vote, 94% in the parishes that were hit by Katrina. So we're sort of a special entity along with the authority on the west bank of the river. That we are the only boards of our kind in the state, I think, where we do not serve at the governor's pleasure. Once we're appointed, we cannot be removed except for cause. But my term and the term of a couple other members of the board have expired, so we're up for reappointment. I have applied there's a process you go through with a nominating committee made up of scientists and good government groups. The governor has to pick someone whom the committee nominates. And I hope to be renominated. The governor has said he's not going to reappoint me. I ran into him on a plane and he personally told me that. But we have the votes on the board to continue the lawsuit, even if he does appoint 3 new members who oppose the lawsuit. It would be a fairly divisive board. We've been extremely collegial since we came into existence, and that would be unfortunate, but I hope even if they oppose the lawsuit, there are plenty of other issues the board considers, and as long as there are really good people, then the government exercises, the governor, it's his prerogative. But there are still the votes on the board to continue the lawsuit, even if the 3 members, including myself, are gone.
You said earlier that you all have been working on this for about a year. Going forward, do you anticipate that this is something that is going to take years until we get some sort of a solution? And we only have 30 seconds.
Well, I can do that in 5. Litigation like this typically takes years. We have the unusual circumstance of having a government state leader that is opposed, which, to say the least, to this lawsuit. So that's going to be a sideshow that we'll have to work through over the course of the next 4 or 5 months, perhaps through the next session when the legislature convenes, because they've threatened to dismantle the board or take away its authority to do this. So anyway, so the answer is yes, it'll take years, likely.
Okay. Well, we thank you both so much for being here with us today, Gladstone Jones and John Berry. We appreciate your time. That is all the time that we have this week on Power of Attorney, but be sure to join us next week when our conversation about this lawsuit will continue. John Berry and attorney Gladstone Jones have agreed to join us for part 2. We invite you to come back as well.
And be sure to keep those questions coming. You can send them through Facebook, Twitter, and email. And for more information, be sure to visit us at our website at johnredmannpoa.com. And thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Gentlemen, excellent show.